Hello everyone, my name is Redbeard and today we're talking about Dark Elves in the Slaanesh DLC. There's been a lot of talk about Vampire Counts or Norska possibly, but I personally not even think, I know that would be a mistake. Both of those races need champions packs in order to be done the justice they deserve. We don't need another scenario like Greenskins and Omens of Destruction. These races would just not fit even half as well as Dark Elves. The only alternative I might accept is Bretonnia, since Slaanesh cults are fairly prevalent in that land and that race should get one more DLC. But yet nay, I say it has to be the Druchii. I've heard too many say, oh, but the Dark Elves don't have anything left. I've come to say to those people, hogwash, baloney, bullshit, and any other term that says, you, sir, have not done enough research. But I have. To that effect, I would say, the Dark Elves have just as much missing as the High Elves, if not actually more. Furthermore, what is missing is far too intrinsically connected to the High Elf Sea Patrol and Slaanesh to make the mistake of not having them as the third faction in this DLC. So before we jump into everything I want to see in the DLC, I think we need to start with the potential FLC reworks. While High Elves need a substantial rework to their race, I don't necessarily think Slaanesh or Dark Elves do. Dark Elves got a big rework from Warhammer 2 to Warhammer 3, which made their mechanics much more simplified, for better or worse. I personally quite enjoyed the micro-intensive, yet meaningful slave economy system of Warhammer 2. The streamlined system of Warhammer 3 works well, admittedly, but I just prefer the Warhammer 2 system. And yes, I'm aware it was highly abusable, but any system that gives more player decision will be. In this situation, that is not a bad thing, in my opinion. Warhammer 3's system is not bad and doesn't necessarily need change. With that said, I would still like some extra layers. The Black Armoury mechanic is something Dark Elves had in tabletop. I will propose this as a unique mechanic for the Hellbanes faction, but alternatively could work for the whole Dark Elf race, perhaps functioning like the Forge for Dwarves or the Forge of Daith for the Sisters of Twilight, meaning you might spend a unique resource to craft and purchase unique items and ancillaries. The other mechanic I've heard people discussing for both Dark Elves and Norska is sending out raiding parties. These would be like a more antagonistic version of Cathay's trade caravans and Chaos Dwarf convoys. You would recruit a raiding party, and instead of hauling cargo, you're trying to capture a set amount of slaves. These armies would start small, but pick up new units along the journey, also encountering different events such as battles that may or may not need to be manually fought. This raiding party would also be potentially vulnerable to attack if you send them along a route that crosses into enemy territory. At the end of the journey, you get the set amount of slaves, gold, and thematic unique items and ancillaries based on the location. Since it is a more antagonistic take on the caravan, it should probably invoke a temporary debuff to the target region, such as growth, income, and public order penalties. When playing a faction targeted by this mechanic, you would get a notice that this army is coming to give you time to prepare to intercept it. Point being, I think this mechanic would go a long way to help both Dark Elves and Norska feel fully fleshed out. The last big thing missing for the Dark Elf race is their Watchtowers along the border of Nagaroth and the Chaos Wastes. They would function very similar to Empire Forts, High Elf Gates, or even the Gates of Cathay's Great Bastion, pseudo settlements with unique maps with only one purpose in mind: defense. I would place at minimum 3, if not more, along the Spiteful Peaks, or even as far as the Iron Mountains. As shown on this map, there are plenty to choose from. Now, to individual faction reworks, I think Malus and Rakarth are in a no change needed situation. maybe some tweaks. Their mechanics are pretty good though. Kryn Hellbrand's Blood Knights and Voyages work pretty well, though I did see a mod by Vort Lol which gives her the Altar of Cain, essentially a Cainite flavored version of 1001 Sacrifices to Sotek, though this kind of mechanic could also work well for Tullaris Dreadbringer, our FLC legendary lord that I will talk about later. Lokhir needs a little bit of love though. Firstly, I would give him the Pseudo Horde mechanic or shipbuilding of the Vampire Coast. Meld the Blessed Dread Black Ark directly to Lokhir's army. This would be the only Dark Elf Lord who can essentially bring his Black Ark on land with him, which will be important for his new teleport mechanic. I will talk about it in a minute. Lokhir could just focus on having the most and best Black Arks and raiding parties, and that might be fine, but there is a story when Lokhir and Dastan Coldeye challenged each other to a Game of Reavers. Each chose a province of the Empire, Ostland in Fellheart's case, and Nordland in Coldeye's case, and each of them had a year to collect a higher bounty of slaves and treasure than the other. I think this would be an excellent mechanic for Lokhir's faction, the Blessed Dread. So how would it work in Total War? After you've secured your first province, your first Game of Reavers will become available. You can challenge any other Dark Elf Lord from Dastan Coldeye, 2 legendary lords such as the Hellbanes, Rakarth, or Malekith, and even minor factions mayhaps, led by generic lords. You pick a race to fight against, such as the Empire, Kislev, Bretonnia, Cathay, Lizardmen, High Elves, etc. Then you pick one of their provinces, and your opponent locks into another. Once locked in, you can choose to teleport Lokhir to the nearest shoreline to said province. Then you have, say, 5 turns to gain more slaves and gold than your opponent. The opponent in question would just auto-generate an army at the nearest shoreline as well to not overcomplicate things. When playing another Dark Elf legendary lord, it could work one of 2 ways. Either Lokhir just can't challenge a player-controlled faction, or the better way is to allow that. So imagine you're playing Malekith or the Hellbanes, and at the beginning of a new turn you get a dilemma pop up saying, Lokhir Fellheart has challenged you to a Game of Reavers. Do you accept? If you do, an army is auto-generated for you at the province shoreline that you picked against the race Lokhir picked. Although perhaps you can pick between 2 or 3 army compositions, so you're not stuck with units you don't particularly fancy. The winner of the game will then receive all the slaves and or gold earned by the loser, as well as perhaps a magic item or ancillary. If Lokhir loses, though, perhaps he can at least keep the slaves and gold he earned, as he was known to have cheated in his game against Coldeye anyway. And it's his mechanic after all. Moving on to Malekith and Morathi, in my upcoming High Elf video I will discuss how Tyrion and Teclis should essentially get the same mechanics, Karl Franz and Balthazar Gelt getting their rework. I think the easiest thing to do for Malekith and Morathi is to do the same thing. Malekith would get his own unique repeatable actions. The first 6 would be more or less the same as Karl Franz, or could be at least. The last 3 I would convert to giving slaves, resetting a lord's loyalty to maxed out. Then the last could be used as a confederation mechanic, requiring you to just get a military alliance with the other Dark Elf faction. I would also give more incentive to seize Ulthuan. Perhaps he has some unique landmarks in Ulthuan, particularly in Lothern, that can boost the Nagaron faction into the stratosphere. The Cult of Pleasure does have some minor Slaaneshi flavor, but I still think Morathi should get her own major mechanic. As Gelt has his Colleges of Magic, Morathi should get her Convent of Sorceresses based in Grond, the North Tower. Just like the colleges, the convents will have 8 pages for the 8 primary winds. As I will discuss more, This update should add the missing lores from Tabletop 2 sorceresses, being Light, Life, Heavens, and Metal. Each page should have 3 repeatable actions and 2 single-use actions. The first repeatable would instantly recruit a sorceress, hero of the relevant lore. The second, a lore-relevant army ability for the targeted army. And third, the lore-relevant Cataclysm spell. These single-use actions would purchase lore-relevant unique items or ancillaries. For Morathi's version, I would add 2 additional pages on top of the 8 primaries for a total of 10, the 2 additional pages, or convents, being for the lore of Dark and the lore of Slaanesh. As these lores don't have Cataclysm spells, we have to come up with something else for the third repeatable action. For the lore of Dark, I would make it so you can select Morathi or any of her Supreme Sorceress Lords and teleport them to any region you own or have an established Cult of Slaanesh under, which connects to the lore of Slaanesh's third repeatable action, instantly establishing a cult under the targeted settlement. In summary, giving Malekith, Morathi, and Tyrion, Teclis, the Franz Gelt treatment would go a long way into finishing those factions. So I've decided to cut this video into 2 parts, so the rest of this video is going to be focused on the FLC I think should come for the Dark Elves, and then the next part 2 will focus on all the DLC stuff. So, where I think Hellbane should fit the 7th Legendary Lord slot for the Dark Elves, I think Tullaris Dreadbringer should fill the 8th and final slot as an FLC Legendary Lord. Now, I've seen people posit Tullaris as the DLC, but personally, this just doesn't make as much sense to me, at least as far as looking at the lore. Whether the, combined cogs and, machines of Creative Assembly and Games Workshop can put their heads together and realize that is a whole nother thing. But, Tullaris is an 8th edition character, the Hellbanes are a 7th, but when you look at the Hellbanes lore, it is perfect for this DLC. So for today, I will talk about Tullaris. Tullaris Dreadbringer is the chosen of Cain, captain of the Harganeth Executioners, and one of the most murderous war leaders in the world. So notorious has Tullaris become within the city of Harganeth and beyond that the rumor of his presence sets an unassailable fear in his enemies' quivering flesh, and the merest glimpse of his blood-encrusted armor has been known to rout foes from the battlefield. He is known to hear whispers from Cain himself, sometimes going into mad fits where his lips work madly as if in conversation with some unseen party. He is also known to leave runes of Cain etched upon the brows of his victims. The true avatar of Cain, unlike Malekith who claims he is, Tullaris may wield the first Drek, but his campaign would focus probably on wielding the Sword of Cain, taking Ulthuan for Helebron, and killing as many as he can. That being said, I think he would be an excellent final FLC for the Dark Elves. As a Harganeth Executioner himself, that is the main unit he would buff. As the avatar of Cain, he may also buff Bloodwrack Shrines, Witch Elves, and Death Hags. He is known to hear whispers from Cain himself. Perhaps these could work like Zarkan whispers from Malus, where he gets missions to unlock unique rewards. This having more Cain vibes over Slaanesh though. His real draw is he would start in the province of Nagaryth, ready to take possession of the Sword of Cain. As his avatar, he should negate some of the debuffs associated with acquiring said item. And as I said before, perhaps he has some kind of copy-paste version of Tenuan's Sacrifice to Sotek or Azul's Cloak of Skulls, but instead it is the Altar of Cain, which may grant Tullaris unique regiments of renown, army abilities, and so forth. So for our last talking point as far as FLC goes, I think Dark Elves are a good place to talk about making a distinction between legendary heroes and personal champions going forward. I suppose another name for them could be pseudo legendary heroes. Thrones of Decay is an awesome DLC in my opinion, but one of my biggest criticisms is that Theodore Bruckner and Kaisk the Befouled are legendary heroes instead of personal champions. For instance, Henry le Massif is Rapunzel's personal champion, or pseudo-legendary hero. She is the only one who can unlock him, if I'm correct. Other Bretonnians need to confederate her to also obtain him. This is lorefully how Theodore and Kaisk ought to have worked. So, don't get me wrong, I'm very happy to see those characters, but we also did not get characters such as Jubal Falk for a legendary engineer, or Valnir the Reaper, who could have worked across multiple Chaos races. My whole point is I would appreciate if you guys listening could help me make this distinction going forward so we might get a better suite of characters and just a broader selection. So with Dark Elves, I think this is very relevant. Both Tullaris and Shadowblade could be personal champions to Hellebron lawfully, but particularly with Malekith, who has two major champions. The first being Corrin Darkhand, captain of the Black Guard. He is a tower of defense, master of melee, halberd wielder. He would also be a support battery for your Black Guard units. Urian Poisonblade is a city guard style master canine assassin, wielding sword or spear, shield, and repeater crossbow, or possibly a hand crossbow. And of course he would deal poison attacks and be very good at dueling. He may also reduce enemy leadership due to his notoriety for torture, especially against his Druki kinsmen. Additionally, there's Lalaith, who is essentially Malekith's main squeeze, though all sorceresses are technically married to Malekith, and there's that bit about the mommy complex. I would probably only add Lalaith, though, if we were expanding Malekith's champions into a full hero gathering mechanic like Tamarkan, Wolfhard, or Dakala, perhaps called Malekith's Endless, though the Endless could also work as a regiment of renown. Morathi's Blood Coven could work for Malekith as well, or for Morathi directly as somewhat unique sorceresses, perhaps as part of her Convent of Sorceresses mechanic I spoke of earlier. Kelthrai, known as the Bloody Death, is a Harganeth executioner and champion to Anethra Hellbane, and subsequently Dariath. He killed his own mother to prove his loyalty to them. So all of these characters would be pseudo-legendary heroes, or again, personal champions, because I think Shadowblade really ought to be the legendary hero come this DLC. But I would also like to see some of these other characters included. And with that, we've covered everything I believe we need for the Dark Elf FLC rework. Stay tuned for the next video where we'll talk about all the DLC content coming, such as Hellbanes, Shadowblade, new units, and so forth. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, bye.